Well, ladies and gentlemen, this weekend we had our first real look inside the PlayStation 5 Slim. This is the revised PS5 that is due out, I believe, this week coming up. There's going to be a Spider-Man bundle, apparently, and also a Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 bundle. So just look out for those. But it looks like after these teardowns, I think there are some pretty interesting things that Sony has done here with this without drastically changing the chip inside of the PlayStation 5, believe it or not. We're going to discuss that a bit here today. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So the two teardowns that I've seen so far, I will have linked down below in the description. That's from Linus Tech Tips and Dave2D. I pulled some stills from their videos, so if you want to see more about this system and some of the other things they found, make sure you check those videos out. But we can see from here immediately the side panel for the PS5 Slim just being removed. There's two side panels, by the way, and also they show the horizontal stands, and it's as bad as you think we thought it would be. It's kind of hilarious, actually, so I guess check out the videos if you want to see more about how the stands go on. But in this case, it looks like they have kept the upgrade for the NVMe that you put inside the PlayStation 5, the disk drive and everything all on one side with that fan. So it is easily accessible. That was a question leading up to this that I feel like an outlet got response back from Sony that you can still upgrade it. It would have been really weird if they removed that. And in fact, it looks like it's still kind of the same way. We do have our disk drive down here that, remember, is removable, user removable. And I have one little concern about how this thing comes off exactly. Now, Dave2D did a good job removing it. Linus kind of just ripped it off of there, which is probably the right test for mainstream consumers. just the worst way you can think of removing it, do it that way and see if the system survives, right, for that durability test. However, the way this works is there's a little tab right back here. All right, you push that in and then it lifts off. So it's basically toolless then, no screws needed. You just pop that up there and you're good to go. Now, setting it back down, apparently you'd line it up with the socket that's there and push down and it'll click into place. I have some concerns about that, which if we see the socket here, is a little piece, which, by the way, this is also, I'm looking at this kind of as a cost-cutting measure for Sony, which is what a lot of this system is kind of playing into a bit, but we'll talk more on that as we get down to the motherboard. But this, for example, this socket, I'm sure there's still things going on inside the drive. No one took the drive apart, but I am curious how exactly this is working inside. But if you take a look at most disk drives for the PS5, PS4, Xbox, you have ribbon cables that have to, of course, run to the board, whether it's the motors, a sensor for if the disk is being inserted into it, the overall sled that controls the spindle, the arm that moves the laser back and forth. There's a lot of stuff going on inside of this disk drive, so you need multiple cables, sensors, etc. In this case, though, just having this one connector to the board eliminates multiple sockets on the board, and these are all things that go into the bottom line for the system. And again, I think that's kind of what this whole revision plays into, is Sony being able to lower the cost on their PlayStation 5 system for manufacturing, be able to make more of them, but also just getting a better return as they go through the generation. The only real issue I have with this disk drive, though, is the removable part. This is definitely going to get tested, this socket, and this looks like a major point of failure if somebody just pushes down the wrong way, it crunches down incorrectly, maybe this little part gets caught on here, and if you break that socket, I assume it's not modular inside, so that's kind of it. Your disc-based PS5 then just can't use it at all. I'm trying to think of any other way they would have done this outside of just running a cable around the outside of the system or something. So it's maybe there would have been a way to attach this better in terms of it sliding in. The fact that you just lay it down, push, and just kind of hope that it lines up is probably not going to end well for some people out there trying to add a disk drive to their system. We do see the upgrade slot here. It's pretty much the same. Even with a fairly large one here with the heatsink on it, seems to fit fine. So no worries there. If you are getting a PS5 Slim, you can go about normally how you would to get an NVMe, or even move the one from your current PS5 to this, although I haven't necessarily tried that myself. I assume it's going to erase whatever's on there. So keep that in mind. You might want to back everything up. But then we get down to the board, and this is where things get extremely interesting, because I kind of feel like Sony either noticed it themselves or took note of videos that did temperature tests. I mean, I did a temperature test, but I'd say someone like Gamers Nexus went all out on it, and they found what I think most people did, in that a certain spot on the board got pretty hot, and it was, I feel like, at least I was wondering if it was because part of the board was just heat soaking completely and it wasn't able to cool that part of the board. But I mean, this is our main heatsink here, and they definitely reorganized this a bit. For example, this piece here, this kind of shorter, smaller piece, the heatsink, is basically angled around and closer to the fan, so that the fan is going to spin kind of in this box right here. I mean, you can kind of see where the cage for the board is shaped around where the fan would go. And it makes sense the way that they are positioning air to flow through it, to pull it through these fins, as opposed to having this more in like a vertical orientation, just kind of hoping air flows through it. So to me, this all makes sense, and it is technically a smaller heatsink, it appears anyway, compared to the most recent PS5, and definitely compared to that first generation system. I do kind of believe that first generation system on the chip side was over-engineered, because Sony knew that they were basically overclocking the chip to get the results they wanted, whether it's from the teraflop side or just overall speed, right, in order to run some of the visuals in these games. So the heatsink was massive, tons of copper everywhere, and it became very costly when we had the chip shortage pandemic, rising material costs, you name it. It was just becoming extremely expensive to source all of that material and put it together in a $500 box, or even $400 box for the all-digital model. So now you can see that they've eliminated quite a bit of the copper. We still have pipes running all over the place, all meeting right here above where the die is. But then on the opposite side, this is the thing that is very interesting to me. And I saw this at first in Dave's video. Dave 2D, we can actually kind of bring this over here and zoom in a little bit, because the thing I'm really curious about is this specific setup, all right? So this is something that is in the original PS5 and then the most recent revision. What they did was they went from 7 nanometers to 6 nanometer, and they didn't really change the shell of the PS5. If you just looked at it, you wouldn't really be able to tell. You'd essentially have to weigh it or look at the model number to figure it out, because that's when they started to shrink down and remove parts from the heatsink. But the backside kind of remained the same. They changed up the tiny little heatsink on the back slightly, but not enough, I feel like, to make a huge difference. This might, though, and I'm very curious to see the temperature test that I feel like Gamers Nexus is absolutely going to run on this, because I noticed that we have this pipe for the heatsink on the back, right? This was always integrated into the shielding. It was essentially underneath of the aluminum and would run around and then down, and then you have little fins pop up on the top. In this case, though, I saw Dave 2D's, and kind of this bird's eye view, it's sort of hard to tell, but then I noticed on Linus's video, Tech Tips, we can see, look at the pipe is actually like hovering above it, right? And what's interesting is Linus accidentally almost ripped this pipe off, and that tells me that it's almost free-floating kind of here. When it's screwed in, it's being held down, obviously, by pressure and things clamping together. That's perfectly fine, but it kind of feels like Sony, what they did was realize that the VRMs that are under here, their voltage regulator modules, were probably causing more heat than they were expecting, especially at peak temperatures when the chip is calling for all kinds of power. Then here's the other side of the cage for the aluminum shielding, and this is where you have the connection for the heat pipe that runs down and around with that heat sink to the VRM, all right? And then we can see the board here. We zoom in. This is exactly what I'm talking about here with all these voltage regulator modules that were being cooled previously by basically the aluminum itself with the heatsink running around. It just seems like they've beefed up the overall cooling for this, which, I mean, you can see how close it is to the RAM back here that was just getting absolutely blitzed with heat from those tests. So I just think Sony trying to pull the heat off here, trying to correct really what was one of the biggest weaknesses of the system that was found in a lot of those different tests online. While it's still going to be pulling the same power because it is still the same chip, I believe, we can see the chip here, and it's still using liquid metal. That was a question. It is. So they didn't go to a basic compound or something like your MX5s, your Arctic Silver, anything available just in the factory. Now, they still kept it liquid metal, and Linus did apparently pull out the calipers and measure it, came up with the same chip size that we have on the most recent 6nm PS5, so that has not changed. In fact, the power draw is still the same. What they've effectively done is just reorganized how they're able to pull heat away from things like the VRMs on the board. Oh, and this is for the storage inside the system, of course, going to 1 terabyte. There are 2 NAND flash here, 2 on the other side. We also have our chipset, and to me, there were questions about, will this affect the speed? If it does, it would be so negligible, it would be almost impossible, I feel like, to really find results in a test at all. And that's the other part, is testing on the PS5 is going to be difficult because I feel like the test you can really run is in different games for loading speeds, and even then, within margin of error for like going down to milliseconds. For the end user, it's really not going to matter. So even let's just say hypothetically this is a couple milliseconds slower. No one really noticed unless you slowed it down and put it side by side. Also, here's a bonus shot of Linus realizing that console manufacturers use different size screws for some of the most mundane things like securing a fan. So when I saw this, I thought, well, welcome to the console world and my pain for the last 12 years. But certainly some interesting stuff coming out of these 2 teardown videos, and I definitely recommend checking them out a bit more. But I'm also working to get a PS5 Slim, hopefully this week coming up, and then maybe like next weekend we can do a teardown on it. I can give some of my impressions on it and take a look at some of the internals of the PS5 Slim firsthand and see what we can find ourselves. But let me know what you guys think about this down below with the teardown of the PS5 Slim, showing that Sony appears to be working on maybe cooling the backside of the board a bit more and still using the 6nm chip that we've actually seen recently in a quiet PS5 revision. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.